It's early morning in a quiet 1950s neighborhood. The sun is barely up, and you can hear the soft clink of glass bottles being set gently on the porch by the milkman. The grass is damp with dew. A push mower rattles faintly a few doors down, and from inside the house comes the comforting aroma of coffee bubbling away on the stove. Even the faint waxy smell of a freshly sharpened pencil on the kitchen table reminds you that school will start soon. These weren't extraordinary things back then. They were simply the rhythm of everyday life in America. The 1950s had a kind of texture that's hard to put into words unless you lived it. It was a time when neighborhoods felt like little worlds of their own, when familiar objects and simple routines stitched life together. The clunky rotary phone in the hallway, the squeal of a metal ice tray being pried open, the hiss of a record starting on the hi-fi. All of these sounds and sights were background music to a generation. What's remarkable is how many of those little things have quietly disappeared. They've slipped into attics, antique shops, or memory itself, only surfacing when a photograph or a story brings them back. And when they do, it's amazing how vividly the past can come rushing forward. In this journey, we're going to revisit 25 of those everyday items that made up the fabric of life in 1950s America. We'll walk back into kitchens filled with the smell of percolating coffee, into living rooms glowing with the flicker of black and white televisions, and out onto sidewalks where kids traded marbles and baseball cards as if they were gold. Some of these objects were practical, others playful, and a few were downright quirky. But every single one held a place in the rhythm of daily living. Ordinary back then, extraordinary now. So settle in and let's take this nostalgic trip together, because sometimes the smallest things, the ones we almost forgot, are the very things that bring the past back to life. Glass milk bottles. Picture this. It's a cool morning in the 1950s, and you open the front door to find two frosty glass bottles sitting neatly on the porch, condensation dripping down their sides. The milkman had been by just minutes earlier, his truck rattling softly as it rolled down the street. There was something special about those bottles, the way the cardboard cap popped off with a little tug, and how the cream settled thickly at the top, waiting for someone to stir it in. Before supermarkets offered everything in plastic cartons, fresh milk was part of a daily ritual. Delivered straight to your door, it wasn't just milk, it was a reminder of community. Everyone knew their milkman by name, and kids sometimes raced out in pajamas just to wave as he drove by. Back then, a quart might cost only 20 cents, and you'd rinse the bottles, leave them on the porch, and they'd be whisked away, washed and reused. It's hard not to smile remembering the clink of glass as you carried them inside, or the nervous balancing act of trying not to drop one on the kitchen floor. They felt sturdy, yet fragile, like little treasures. Today, seeing a glass milk bottle instantly transports you back to simpler times, when even something as ordinary as milk delivery felt personal, reliable, and part of life's comforting rhythm. Percolator coffee pots. There's a certain sound that can take you right back to a 1950s kitchen, the steady, cheerful burble of a percolator coffee pot on the stove. Before drip machines and single-serve pods, this was how America woke up. You'd hear the rhythmic plop-plop as water bubbled through grounds, filling the kitchen with that rich, nutty aroma that wrapped itself around you like a warm hug. The percolator itself was often chrome, gleaming on the stovetop or plugged into the wall on the counter, with a little glass knob on top where you could watch the coffee splutter and brew. It wasn't just about making coffee, it was about anticipation. The longer it bubbled, the stronger it got, and everyone had an opinion on when it was just right. Back then, a pound of Maxwell House or Folgers might run you less than $1, and the familiar jingles, good to the last drop, became part of the soundtrack of daily life. Mornings in the 1950s started with that earthy smell wafting through the house, sometimes mixed with the scent of frying bacon or fresh biscuits. And somehow, coffee from a percolator always seemed bolder, more robust. It wasn't perfect, sometimes it was bitter or too strong, but it was real, communal. Pouring that first steaming cup felt like an invitation to slow down, talk, and start the day together. Rotary dial telephones. Do you remember the feel of slipping your finger into the hole of a rotary dial and spinning it around, listening to that satisfying click-whir as it spun back? Calling someone in the 1950s required patience and precision. Every number was an action, a small ceremony before you finally heard the line ring. Phones weren't sleek gadgets in your pocket. They were solid, heavy devices, often black, sometimes pastel-colored in kitchens or living rooms, with coiled cords that twisted no matter how carefully you held them. They usually sat on a hallway table or hung on the wall, a central hub for family communication. And because calls weren't cheap and long distance could really add up, people used the phone with intention. Kids were scolded for tying up the line too long, and neighbors sometimes shared party lines where you could overhear another household's conversation if you picked up at the wrong time. It was a mix of convenience and comedy. Imagine explaining that to someone today. The rotary phone wasn't just a machine, it was a presence in the home. The sharp ring cut through the quiet of the evening, and answering it carried a sense of importance. Each call mattered. And even now, many of us can still hear that whir in our heads, a sound forever tied to family life in the 1950s. Metal ice trays. Ah, the unforgettable struggle of the metal ice tray. Before plastic molds and automatic ice makers, the 1950s household relied on heavy aluminum trays with a lever handle. They looked simple enough, but anyone who ever wrestled with one remembers the ritual. Tugging on that handle with a squeak and a snap, only to have half the cube stick stubbornly to the bottom. These trays sat in the freezing cold of the family's top-loading freezer, collecting a thin layer of frost that clung to your fingers if you touched it too long. You'd pull one out for company, the metal biting cold against your skin, and hope you could free enough cubes without spilling water across the counter. It might sound like a small thing, but those ice trays were part of every gathering. Picture a summer evening with neighbors sitting on the porch, lemonade sweating in tall glasses, each one clinking with ice hard-won from those trays. Or a holiday cocktail mixed by Dad, who grumbled at the cubes that wouldn't budge but managed to get just enough for everyone. There was satisfaction when the lever finally gave way with a crack, releasing perfect frosty cubes. It wasn't effortless, but that was part of it. The little struggle made the refreshment that followed taste just a bit sweeter. Console TV sets. Imagine the whole family gathered in the living room, the glow of a black and white picture flickering inside a massive wooden cabinet that was almost as much furniture as it was technology. In the 1950s, television was still new and magical, and those console TV sets became the centerpiece of the home. You'd adjust the rabbit ear antennas, maybe wrap them in aluminum foil to coax a clearer signal, and then settle in. Programs like I Love Lucy or The Ed Sullivan Show brought laughter and music into millions of homes. Back then, owning a TV was a point of pride, something neighbors might even drop by to enjoy if they hadn't yet purchased their own. The picture wasn't perfect, sometimes it wobbled or went snowy, but that only added to the charm. Kids sat cross-legged on the floor, parents claimed the good chairs, and everyone shared the moment together. Advertisers knew exactly what they were doing too. Whether it was soap commercials or cereal jingles, they became part of the viewing experience. Those big console sets weren't portable, they weren't sleek, but they were steady, reliable, and full of wonder. For many, the memory of the first television in the house still feels like the arrival of a new family member. Hi-fi record players. Before streaming, before even cassette tapes, the sound of music in a 1950s home often came from a hi-fi record player. These were big, beautiful machines, sometimes built right into elegant wooden cabinets that gave music a warmth you could almost feel. The moment the needle dropped onto a vinyl record, there was a gentle crackle, followed by the swell of sound that filled the room. Teenagers discovered Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry this way, spinning 45 RPM singles until the grooves nearly wore out. Parents might have put on Sinatra or Perry Como after dinner, letting the house fill with smooth melodies. Records weren't just background noise, they set the mood, whether it was a lively dance party in the basement or a quiet evening winding down. A new 45 might cost about $1, and kids would save allowance money just to pick out the latest hit from the record store. Stacks of vinyl sleeves sat next to the player, each one a memory waiting to be replayed. And of course, there was a ritual to it all, carefully placing the record, gently lowering the arm, then flipping it over for the B-side surprise. Every pop and hiss in the sound was part of the charm, a reminder that music wasn't just heard, it was experienced. Drive-in theater speakers. Picture a warm summer night, the smell of popcorn drifting through the air, and a giant movie screen rising against the twilight sky. In the 1950s, the drive-in theater was more than just a place to watch films, it was a cultural event. Families piled into cars with blankets and snacks, teenagers cruised in with dates, and the excitement built as rows of vehicles lined up facing the screen. At each parking spot, a heavy metal speaker waited on a post. You'd unhook it and hang it on your car window, the tinny sound of dialogue mixing with the chorus of crickets outside. The audio wasn't perfect, sometimes it buzzed or crackled, but nobody seemed to mind. It was all part of the magic. Tickets were cheap, often under $1 per car, making it an affordable outing for everyone. Kids in pajamas would fall asleep in the back seat halfway through, while parents enjoyed the rest of the double feature. For teenagers, it was the ultimate date night. A little privacy, a lot of fun, and maybe more attention paid to the company than the movie. Drive-ins felt like a slice of Americana, casual, communal, and unforgettable. Even now, the sight of one of those old gray speakers can instantly transport you back to those summer evenings under the stars. Board games like Parcheesi. When the TV was off and the record player silent, families often turned to board games for entertainment. In the 1950s, classics like Parcheesi, Sorry, or Monopoly sat tucked inside hall closets, their colorful boards ready to be spread across the dining room table. There was something about the ritual, opening the box, unfolding the board, sorting out the well-worn pieces. Dice clattered, tokens slid across brightly printed paths, and the room filled with laughter, groans, and maybe a little friendly arguing. It was simple, face-to-face fun, the kind that pulled everyone together. Parcheesi, originally from India, had become a household staple in America by then. Its easy-to-learn rules made it a favorite for kids, while still challenging enough for adults to get competitive. And games lasted long enough that hours seemed to slip by before anyone noticed bedtime approaching. For many families, board games weren't just pastimes. They were traditions. Winning didn't matter as much as being together, sharing snacks, and making memories. The sound of a younger sibling complaining about being sent back to start, or the sight of Dad pretending to pout when he lost, it all added to the fun. Those games created moments of connection, the kind we look back on now and realize were some of the most meaningful nights of all. Marbles and shooters. Close your eyes and picture a dusty sidewalk or a chalk circle drawn on the playground. A group of kids crouched low, eyes locked on a prize, a swirling glass marble glinting in the sun. In the 1950s, marbles weren't just toys. They were a form of currency, a test of skill, and sometimes even bragging rights among friends.
Every kid had a pouch or tin full of them, cat's eyes with their colorful streaks inside, solid peewees, and the larger shooters used to knock others out of the ring. You'd hear the sharp click of glass against concrete as one marble sent another skittering across the ground. Sometimes games got competitive, but most of the time it was about fun and the thrill of the trade. A bag of marbles cost just a few cents back then, making them accessible to nearly everyone. And they were portable. Slip them in your pocket, and you were ready for a game anywhere. The schoolyard, the sidewalk, even the living room rug, if your parents didn't mind. Looking back, marbles taught more than just hand-eye coordination. They sparked imagination, built friendships, and gave kids a sense of ownership. And even today, holding one in your hand feels like holding a tiny piece of childhood, full of color, memory, and magic. Cap guns. If you grew up in the 1950s, chances are you can still recall the sharp smell of gunpowder from red paper cap rolls. Cowboy movies and television shows like Hop-Along Cassidy and Gunsmoke ruled the airwaves, and kids carried that Wild West spirit straight into their backyards with trusty cap guns. They were made of metal or sturdy plastic, shaped like revolvers, often tucked into toy holsters. You'd load in a strip of paper caps, cock the hammer, and bang! A pop echoed out, leaving behind that unmistakable sulfur scent. The louder the crack, the bigger the grin. Cap guns weren't just toys. They were tickets to grand adventures. One moment you were chasing outlaws, the next you were the sheriff defending Main Street. Kids played in packs, staging elaborate duels that sometimes stretched until the street lights flicked on. And even if you lost a duel, you walked away smelling faintly of caps, a badge of honor all its own. A cap roll might cost a dime, making it an easy thrill for kids with allowance money to spend. Today, those toys might raise eyebrows, but back then, they were innocent fun, about imagination more than anything else. For many, the crack of a cap gun is forever tied to carefree afternoons of play, laughter, and dusty cowboy dreams. Hopscotch chalk. On warm afternoons, sidewalks became playgrounds, and chalk was the magic wand that transformed gray concrete into endless fun. With just a few sticks of dusty white or brightly colored chalk, kids drew the familiar hopscotch grid, numbered boxes stretching forward like a path to adventure.
The rules were simple. Toss a stone or bottle cap, hop through the squares on one foot, pick it up, and make it back without falling. Easy in theory, but in practice, it was a test of balance, rhythm, and focus. Laughter often erupted when someone lost balance and tumbled out, leaving chalky smudges on knees and palms. The best part was how little it cost. A piece of chalk was just pennies, and yet it could keep a group of kids entertained for hours. You'd see chalk dust on fingers, on shoes, and sometimes smeared across cheeks, proof of a day well spent. Hopscotch wasn't only about the game, it was about community. Any kid walking by could jump in, no equipment needed. And as the sun set, the grid would fade, worn down by sneakers and scuffs, only to be redrawn the next day. Something about those chalk lines still feels timeless, a reminder of how the simplest games often left the deepest marks on childhood memories. Jacks and rubber balls. There was a certain rhythm to playing jacks, one that became second nature to kids in the 1950s. Sitting on a smooth floor, you'd scatter a handful of shiny metal stars, then toss a small red rubber ball into the air. The challenge: scoop up one jack, then two, then three, always before the ball bounced twice. It was a game of quick reflexes, steady hands, and a little bit of luck. The clink of jacks against hardwood was instantly recognizable, a sound that echoed through kitchens and porches across America. Kids often carried their sets in little cloth bags or tins, ready to play at a moment's notice. Jacks were inexpensive, usually costing just a few cents, which made them a universal pastime.
And though the game could get competitive, it was mostly about practice, perseverance, and the fun of watching your own improvement. Some kids could scoop up all 10 in one smooth motion, earning the admiration of everyone else. Beyond the game itself, jacks brought kids together. Friends huddled close, cheering each other on, swapping turns, and laughing when the ball rolled away under a table. Like so many toys of the era, it was simple, accessible, and endlessly entertaining, a reminder that joy often came from the smallest of things. Cigarette vending machines. Step into a corner diner in the 1950s, and right by the door you'd often find a gleaming cigarette vending machine. Tall, chrome, and full of brightly colored packs, it practically hummed with temptation. For a few coins, usually 25 cents, you'd pull a lever with a satisfying clunk, and a pack of Lucky Strikes or Chesterfields would drop into the tray below. These machines were everywhere: bus stations, bowling alleys, roadside cafes. Their glowing fronts, often lit with neon logos, became part of the backdrop of adult life. Even if you weren't a smoker, you couldn't forget the look of those shiny boxes stacked neatly behind glass, promising sophistication and calm. At the time, smoking was woven into the culture, seen in movies, TV shows, even ads where doctors cheerfully endorsed one brand or another. The vending machine simply made it more convenient, blending into daily errands as naturally as grabbing a soda. Looking back now, it's a relic of a very different time. Today, they might seem shocking, but in the 1950s, they were ordinary, part of the rhythm of a grown-up world kids watched with curiosity. The sound of that lever being pulled and the pack sliding into place is one of those tiny sensory memories that instantly transport you back. Coin-operated payphones. Before cell phones slipped into every pocket, the world relied on payphones, solid, dependable, and just about everywhere. In the 1950s, you'd spot their familiar booths on busy sidewalks, inside train stations, or tucked into the corners of diners. Step inside, close the folding glass door, and suddenly you had a little bubble of privacy, even with traffic roaring outside. The ritual was simple: fish out a dime, drop it into the slot, and listen for that metallic clink. You'd dial carefully, finger slipping through the holes of the rotary dial, then wait for the ring. Connections weren't always crystal clear, but hearing a familiar voice miles away felt nothing short of miraculous. For many families, long distance was expensive, so calls were short, to the point, and often rehearsed before you even dialed. Kids memorized phone numbers the way we memorize passwords today, and that heavy receiver felt almost like an anchor in your hand. Payphones were lifelines in emergencies, too. Stranded motorists, forgotten bus fare, kids calling parents for a ride, all depended on them. Even the smell of those booths, metal, glass, and a hint of cigarette smoke, remains vivid in memory. They weren't glamorous, but they were essential. And the sight of one now instantly sparks a wave of nostalgia for an era when reaching out really meant reaching across miles. S&H green stamps. Ask anyone who lived through the 1950s about S&H green stamps, and you'll likely get a smile. These little trading stamps were everywhere, handed out at grocery stores, gas stations, and department stores as rewards for purchases. Each book of stamps represented possibility, a slow-burn excitement that built with every shopping trip.
The process was simple but oddly satisfying. You'd lick the back of each green stamp and press it carefully into the pages of a saver book. Kids often helped, their tongues turning sticky sweet from the glue, while parents kept neat stacks of filled books tucked in a kitchen drawer. Once enough books were complete, families flipped through the thick catalog of rewards, everything from toasters to bicycles. For many households, these items felt like luxuries otherwise out of reach, making the stamps feel almost magical. It wasn't just about the prizes, it was the ritual. Collecting, saving, and dreaming together made shopping more than a chore. It gave families a shared goal. And when the chosen item finally arrived, it carried a sense of pride far bigger than its price tag.
Today, those green stamps feel quaint, but they remind us of a time when little tokens added up to big dreams, and patience truly paid off. Hand-pushed lawnmowers. On Saturday mornings in the 1950s, the hum of gas mowers hadn't yet taken over. Instead, neighborhoods echoed with the rhythmic snip, snip, snip of hand-pushed reel mowers slicing through the grass. These simple machines relied entirely on elbow grease. No cords, no engines, just a steady push that set the blades whirring like scissors. The mower itself was a sturdy contraption of steel, with a wooden handle polished smooth by countless hands. It wasn't easy work. The blades sometimes jammed on a twig, and tall grass made each row a test of strength. But the reward was a yard neatly trimmed, the air filled with the fresh, green scent of cut grass. For many kids, pushing that mower was their first summer job, payment in quarters or maybe just a cold lemonade. Parents took pride in a tidy lawn, and the act of mowing became almost meditative, a steady rhythm under the warm sun. Unlike modern machines, reel mowers were quiet. You could hear birds singing, neighbors chatting over fences, kids playing ball down the street, all while the blades clicked along. Looking back, it wasn't just yard work, it was part of the soundtrack of suburban life, proof of care and pride in a home. And somehow, that simple click of spinning blades still echoes in memory. Tin hair curlers. If you ever peeked into a 1950s bedroom at night, you might have seen a woman sitting patiently in front of a vanity, her hair wound tightly into rows of tin curlers. These little metal tubes promised the perfect waves and curls, but they weren't exactly comfortable. Sleeping in them was like resting your head on a bed of pebbles, and yet it was a nightly ritual for countless women. The curlers clicked into place with pins, holding damp hair securely until morning. Some were heated on the stove for extra effect, filling the air with the faint scent of singed hair and metal. Mothers passed the practice down to daughters, teaching them patience and pride in presentation. The effort paid off. Curls were the signature look of the decade, seen on silver screen icons like Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Taylor. A woman's hairstyle wasn't just fashion, it was a statement of grace, order, and confidence in a time when appearances mattered. Despite the discomfort, there was camaraderie in it. Women swapped tips at beauty parlors, and girls giggled at sleepovers with their heads full of curlers. Looking back now, those shiny tin rollers remind us that beauty in the 1950s wasn't effortless. It was carefully crafted, one pinched scalp at a time. Shaving brushes. Step into a 1950s bathroom, and on the sink you'd likely find a sturdy mug, a cake of soap, and a shaving brush standing ready. Before the rise of pressurized cans and disposable razors, this was the ritual of men everywhere. Dip the brush in warm water, swirl it over the soap, and suddenly the bristles whipped up a rich, foamy lather. The brush itself often had a wooden or ivory-colored handle, topped with bristles that tickled the skin as the cream was spread. The smell was unmistakable, clean, soapy, with maybe a hint of menthol or bay rum aftershave waiting just around the corner. Shaving wasn't rushed, it was a practiced art. The straight razor or safety razor that followed required steady hands and care, making the process almost meditative. For boys, watching their fathers shave this way was a rite of passage, the moment that hinted at adulthood. Brushes weren't expensive, but they were long-lasting, often gifted at birthdays or Father's Day, a small symbol of dignity. And there was pride in the ritual, the careful strokes, the splash of cold water after, and the satisfaction of feeling clean-shaven. Today, shaving brushes are a curiosity, but for many men of the 1950s, they were as essential as a morning cup of coffee. Compact mirrors with powder. Reach into almost any woman's purse in the 1950s, and you'd likely find a compact mirror with pressed powder tucked inside. These elegant little cases, often gold or silver, snapped shut with a satisfying click, their surfaces etched with floral designs or initials. They weren't just makeup, they were small treasures carried everywhere.
Powder was a beauty staple of the time, keeping skin matte and flawless under the glow of hot studio lights and everyday life alike. A quick dab in the restroom, a glance into the mirror, and a woman felt ready to face the world again. The faint floral scent of the powder lingered, mixing with the perfume every woman seemed to wear. For young girls, sneaking a peek into their mother's compact felt like holding a piece of glamour. Watching mom pat her face with practiced poise became an unspoken lesson in confidence. At parties, the compact wasn't just for touch-ups, it was a graceful gesture, a way of saying, "I care about how I present myself." They weren't expensive, but they felt luxurious. Some were even gifted on special occasions, cherished like jewelry. Today, holding one in your hand is like opening a little time capsule, polished with fingerprints from another era of grace and care. Polaroid land cameras. In an age when most photographs required trips to the drugstore and days of waiting, the Polaroid land camera felt like magic. Introduced in the late 1940s and wildly popular by the 1950s, it gave families the power to snap a picture and watch it develop right before their eyes. The process was fascinating. After clicking the shutter, you'd pull out the exposed print and wait, the image slowly emerging in shades of gray. Kids crowded around, marveling at the transformation, while parents carefully peeled back the backing to reveal the final photo, still damp and smelling faintly of chemicals. At around $70, the Polaroid wasn't cheap, but it was worth every penny for families eager to capture moments instantly. Birthdays, road trips, backyard barbecues, all were frozen in time within minutes. Albums began to fill with slightly blurry but deeply personal snapshots that felt alive in a way studio portraits never did. Holding that little square photo in your hands was powerful. Unlike film negatives sent away for development, Polaroids belonged to you immediately. They encouraged spontaneity, capturing laughter, surprise, and everyday life unpolished. Today, they're prized collectibles, but in the 1950s, they were cutting-edge marvels, tools that made memory tangible, as instant and precious as the moment itself. Neighborhood ice cream carts. On a hot summer afternoon in the 1950s, nothing stirred excitement quite like the faint jingle of an ice cream cart rolling down the street. Kids would freeze mid-game, heads snapping toward the sound, then sprint inside to beg nickels from their parents. That tiny bell was a universal call to joy. The carts were simple, often brightly painted with hand-lettered signs advertising popsicles, creamsicles, and fudgesicles. The vendor, usually with a warm smile, would flip open the cold metal lid, releasing a frosty wave of sweet air that made mouths water instantly. A popsicle cost just 5 cents, dripping faster than you could lick it in the summer sun. For many neighborhoods, the ice cream man was more than a vendor. He was part of the rhythm of childhood, predictable, reliable, and always welcome. Friends clustered together, trading bites or daring each other to finish before it melted into sticky rivers down their arms. The memory isn't just about the taste, it's about community. Neighbors gathered on porches, kids sat on curbs, and for a few minutes everyone shared the simple happiness of a cold treat on a warm day. Even now, the distant sound of a bell on a summer breeze can bring back that same rush of anticipation. Roller skates with keys. Before inline skates and fancy sneakers with wheels, kids in the 1950s strapped clunky metal skates right onto their shoes. Adjustable with a special key, these roller skates clamped down tight, or sometimes not tight enough, making every ride a thrilling mix of freedom and wobble. The skates rattled noisily over sidewalks, the steel wheels sparking slightly if you hit a bump just right. The skate key itself was a prized possession, usually worn on a string around the neck so you never lost it. Without it, your skates were useless, and every kid knew the panic of misplacing one. Neighborhood streets turned into roller rinks, kids racing, laughing, and occasionally tumbling in a blur of scraped knees and elbows. The sound of those skates, metal clattering against pavement, was its own music, echoing down suburban blocks all summer long. For just a few dollars, a pair of skates could provide endless hours of adventure.
They weren't smooth or comfortable, but they gave kids something precious: independence. Rolling down the sidewalk felt like flying, even if only for a few shaky feet. Today, those old metal skates might look primitive, but to anyone who used them, they were tickets to freedom. A simple key unlocked not just wheels, but whole afternoons of joy. Greyhound bus terminals. In the 1950s, America was on the move, and Greyhound bus terminals were the gateways to adventure. These bustling hubs buzzed with activity: families saying goodbye, soldiers heading home, students chasing opportunity. Inside, chrome counters gleamed under fluorescent lights, ticket clerks worked briskly, and the smell of coffee and fried food drifted from vending machines and diners. Greyhound buses, with their sleek silver exteriors and blue stripes, promised affordable travel across the country. A trip might cost just a few dollars, making long-distance journeys accessible even to modest families. Passengers piled in with suitcases and paper-wrapped lunches, ready for hours or days on the road.
For children, terminals were wonderlands of motion, flashing signs, luggage carts rattling, the excitement of climbing aboard. For adults, they were bittersweet, places of reunions and farewells, filled with emotion that lingered long after the bus pulled out. The ride itself was part of the memory. The hiss of brakes, the sway of the bus, the quiet hum of conversation, mixed with the occasional snore of a dozing traveler. Every trip held a hint of adventure, even if it was just across the state. Today, those old terminals may feel outdated, but in the 1950s, they were symbols of connection, proof that the open road was always waiting. Road maps in glove compartments. Before GPS, before cell phones with directions at a tap, road trips in the 1950s relied on folded paper maps tucked inside glove compartments. They were sprawling accordion-fold puzzles, decorated with bold red highways and winding blue state routes. Unfolding one across the dashboard took skill and patience to refold again neatly. Families heading out for summer vacations planned their routes carefully, tracing paths with pencils or circling towns to stop in. Gas station attendants often handed out free maps, sometimes stamped with logos from Gulf, Texaco, or Esso. These maps smelled faintly of ink and paper, and they carried the promise of adventure in their creases. Of course, maps weren't perfect. Misread directions often led to detours, wrong turns, or sudden discoveries of small towns not on the itinerary. Parents debated routes, kids asked endlessly, "Are we there yet?" And somehow the map always became part of the story. A glove compartment without a map felt incomplete. It was as essential as a spare tire or a flashlight. And unlike today's silent GPS voices, maps encouraged conversation, planning, and a sense of shared discovery. Looking back, those crinkled pages remind us that sometimes the best part of travel wasn't just reaching the destination, it was figuring out the way together. Gas station attendant. Pulling into a gas station in the 1950s was nothing like today. You didn't pump your own gas. You were greeted by a smiling attendant in a crisp uniform, cap tipped politely as he jogged up to the car. "Fill her up," he'd ask, before handling everything for you. While the tank filled, he'd wash the windshield with practiced swipes, check the oil, and sometimes even top off the tires. All of this service was included in the price of gas, which hovered around 25 cents a gallon. Families sat comfortably inside the car, kids watching wide-eyed as the routine unfolded like a small performance. Stations themselves often gleamed with neon signs and polished pumps, proudly displaying brands like Sinclair, Shell, or Gulf. These maps smelt faintly of ink and paper, and they carried the promise of adventure in their creases. Of course, maps weren't perfect. Misread directions often led to detours, wrong turns, or sudden discoveries of small towns not on the itinerary. Parents debated routes, kids asked endlessly, "Are we there yet?" And somehow the map always became part of the story. A glove compartment without a map felt incomplete. It was as essential as a spare tire or a flashlight. And unlike today's silent GPS voices, maps encouraged conversation, planning, and a sense of shared discovery.
Looking back, those crinkled pages remind us that sometimes the best part of travel wasn't just reaching the destination, it was figuring out the way together. Gas station attendant. Pulling into a gas station in the 1950s was nothing like today. You didn't pump your own gas, you were greeted by a smiling attendant in a crisp uniform, cap tipped politely as he jogged up to the car. Fill her up, he'd ask, before handling everything for you. While the tank filled, he'd wash the windshield with practiced swipes, check the oil, and sometimes even top off the tires. All of this service was included in the price of gas, which hovered around 25 cents a gallon. Families sat comfortably inside the car, kids watching wide-eyed as the routine unfolded like a small performance. Stations themselves often gleamed with neon signs and polished pumps, proudly displaying brands like Sinclair, Shell, or Gulf. The attendants became familiar faces, part of the neighborhood, always ready with a kind word or directions if you were traveling through. There was a certain pride in the ritual. Cars were still relatively new for many families, and taking care of them felt important. Driving away with a clean windshield and a full tank wasn't just convenient, it was reassuring. That level of personal service is rare today, but the memory of those friendly attendants remains a lasting symbol of an era when even the smallest errands carried a touch of courtesy and care. And so, as the last gas pump clicks shut and the final roadmap folds back into a glove compartment, we realize something important. These weren't just objects. They were part of the fabric of daily life in 1950s America, woven into the routines, rituals, and relationships that defined a generation. Each one carried a sensory memory: the clink of glass milk bottles, the burble of a percolator, the squeal of a metal ice tray. They carried emotions too: laughter around a board game, the thrill of a cap gun duel, or the comfort of hearing Dad's voice on the rotary phone. These weren't background details, they were centerpieces of everyday stories. What makes them so powerful now is that they remind us of a slower rhythm, a time when community was stronger and simplicity had its own richness. The milkman wasn't just delivering dairy, he was part of the neighborhood. The ice cream cart wasn't just a snack, it was the highlight of a summer afternoon with friends. Even the bus terminal, the payphone, or the vending machine carried more than their function. They carried connection, routine, and a kind of shared trust. Of course, time moves on. Those curlers, those maps, those stamps, most of them have vanished, replaced by new conveniences. But the memories linger, glowing softly in the corners of our minds. And when we stumble across one of these objects today, maybe in an antique store or tucked away in a grandparent's attic, it's like opening a door straight back into the past. Perhaps that's the real magic of nostalgia. It takes the ordinary and makes it extraordinary, reminding us that the little things were never little at all. They were the markers of our days, the anchors of our routines, the sparks of joy in a simpler time. So the next time someone asks, "Do you remember when?" you'll smile, and for just a moment it'll all come rushing back.